Great. Thanks, Scott. Hello, everyone. Instead of waiting until the very end, I'd like to kick off by taking this opportunity to thank the University of Akron College of Business for hosting this summit and allowing me to speak to you today about data-informed decision-making. Data-informed decision-making is a concept that I truly believe in, and I'll take you along on a journey to explain why it's important for any organization. Sure, everyone is very aware of data-driven decision-making since it's the main topic of this summit. Companies like Amazon and Google practice it every day and seem to be very successful with it. But the question is, how do we become data-driven in the first place? Let's take a look. If we take a step back and look at a local organization to Cleveland and what they're doing to work with data better, Heinen's is a great example of a company looking to make the transformation to work with data more strategically. If you're unfamiliar with Heinen's, they're a nearly century-old grocery store with 19 locations in the Cleveland area and another 4 in the northern Chicago area. They strive to exceed the standards for customer service as well as deliver high-quality and source-verified products. Besides that, one of their biggest assets is their associates. These are the people that you see providing the exceptional customer service that we all feel that we deserve. Sure, you may be wondering exactly what data-informed decision-making is and how it's different from data-driven decision-making. The difference is simple. Data-driven decision-making is largely letting the data tell you what decisions to make. Now, on the other hand, data-informed decision-making takes that same data, but brings intuition and expertise into the decision-making process, so we don't solely rely on the data to tell us what we should do. Not many organizations are prepared to become data-driven right away, so becoming data-informed is the logical first step. One of the common issues that I come across with many organizations is that they want to become data-driven, but they aren't exactly sure what that really means. They hear that successful companies are making changes to become more data-driven, and they too want to achieve better performance. Companies make a general assumption that this means using more data to make decisions. Well, this is partially correct. In all reality, most are interested in making data-informed decisions. Companies have many years of experience at what they do, and they're not going to immediately throw that out the window to rely merely on what the data is telling them to do. This is exactly the type of organization that Heinen's is striving to be. They want to become data-informed in every area of their business, in their stores, in their supply chain, and even in their central kitchen. They want to embrace data as an asset. Heinen's collectively has hundreds of years of grocery experience in their main office that they want to pair with data to make better decisions and more informed decisions. I had the chance to meet one of Heinen's associates at a data and analytics meetup that I co-host in the Cleveland area. When we first spoke, it was primarily around the tools that I would suggest that they bring in to make things easier for their associates to work with data. Without fully understanding the position a company is in, it's really hard for me to make a quick recommendation on tools. I told her that I'd need to learn a little bit more about what they were doing organizationally in order to provide a much better recommendation. At the time, Heinen's was currently using Excel-based reporting and providing spreadsheets daily to almost anyone who might want to use it. This was very overwhelming for a lot of associates, mainly because they were either A, not well versed in working with spreadsheets, or B, wading through mountains of data to try to find any hidden insights. One of the next meetup groups that we hosted was around data strategy and the importance of having one. This is where I started to explain more around how data-informed decision-making needs a strategy to get an organization to that first level. This is also when it clicked for that associate. Heinen's had been focusing on trying to implement new tools to fix what they thought was broken. Each of the tools yielded either a failed implementation, lack of user adoption, or created a new problem that was needed to be addressed with what seemed to be a different tool. If tools alone could solve these problems, we'd spend much more time on innovation rather than the tactical day-to-day operations with infrequent time being spent on innovating. With Heinen's, we were starting on the ground floor. They weren't data-driven, nor were they data-informed. They really didn't have a robust way of turning data into information. They have a very small team that is moving data around from their systems. They had a desire to get somewhere. They just didn't know how to take that leap of faith and were actually very hesitant to do so because of past failed attempts with tools. With most companies, there's a lack of data direction for them to move in as it relates to turning data into something more meaningful and actionable. This shouldn't be attributed to lack of expertise, though. The ever-changing landscape of how we work with data is the real culprit. We're moving at high rates of speed to use data to make better decisions. We're also trying to keep up with a business that is asking us to provide data and tools to make these decisions. The amount of data that companies produce daily is starting to grow exponentially. The teams that handle this data are becoming busier and busier, trying to make sure that their data sprawl is managed properly, and also ensuring others can use data to make decisions. So how do we fix this? Well, I'm glad that you asked. When these overloaded teams are focused solely on the tactical aspects of what needs to happen, they lose sight of why it needs to happen. The overall concept here is we need to focus less on the tools that we think can actually help us get somewhere quicker and take a step back and focus on the real problem at hand, the what, why, and how of working with data. There are many more factors such as who and when, but in order to start small, the first three critical factors are the most vital to figure out. What data are we collecting and using, and what decisions are being made off that data? Why are we collecting, using, and making decisions off this data? And how are we collecting, using, and making decisions off this data? This is mainly so we have a better grasp on the data itself, and we don't let ourselves get too far down the path of executing. These simple questions will get you started down the path of developing a data strategy. I always like to help my clients make sure that they take a step back to understand the why behind what their organization is doing. And this is exactly what I did with Heinen's. So at this point, you may be asking a number of questions. Two of those could be, what is a data strategy and how does it fit in with data-informed decision-making? Gartner's definition of data strategy is a highly dynamic process employed to support the acquisition, organization, analysis, and delivery of data in support of business objectives. What does this mean in simpler terms? It means we need to have a plan for how we are going to bring data in, how we store it, and how we're going to use it to make better decisions. Now, that may be a little oversimplified, but let's dive in a bit to see how a data strategy is made up and what it has to do with data-informed decision-making. At the core, I needed to make sure that I could effectively communicate with the associates at Heinen's. I had to put things into their terms so it was best understood since they aren't too advanced in working with data. I spoke with associates from all levels to gather their input, ranging from how they use data to understanding what they believe the organization's overall data fluency rating was. I would say 95% of people asked me what this meant. We not only need to effectively communicate, but we need to understand how the organization communicates with data. Data fluency is ultimately speaking that same language of data between all areas of the business. This told me that we needed to put plenty of training into our strategy to educate associates along the journey. If we don't build education and training into the data strategy, it won't be sustainable for long-term success, which really poses a threat to becoming more data informed. If associates can't do the job that's expected of them, they will be set up for immediate failure. One question I asked every associate was, what are your current goals and objectives? This question gives me an inside look into what problems they were trying to solve with data. If we want to develop a data strategy that will succeed, it needs to be tied to your business goals and objectives. In order to improve how you work with data, you need to connect it to the why you work with data. The answer to the goals and objectives question was vastly different depending on who I spoke with. The views from co-CEOs Tom and Jeff Heinen were noticeably different from the meat manager at the store in Chagrin Falls, but they had a common theme: easier access to data. This sounds very simplistic in nature, but it has many components that go into delivering on the idea of easier access to data. The art of listening is something that not many take into consideration, but I heard what the associates wanted, and I also heard what they needed. They may not have told me directly what they needed, but I listened to them voice their concerns about how they wanted better tools, friendlier reporting, as well as some dashboards to use. I heard everything beyond the words that they spoke. What everything boils down to is people, process, and technology. These are three key areas to address when venturing out on the journey to become data informed. Do we have the people that can make this change? Do we have the processes in place in order to make the change? And lastly, is the technology in place to make the change to become data informed? I educated the Heinen's team as we started on our journey. We spoke about why building the proper foundation for the store was the first step in order to become data driven or data informed. We wanted to do that before we actually dive in to see what the salad bar looked like. We need to understand what we were building before we try to jump headfirst in and just do it. Then we needed to understand why we want to do it and tie that back to our business goals and objectives. The business should dictate where we go on our journey with technology. If there is no craving for more data or information, that journey to data-informed decision-making will be a tough one, especially if it's solely driven by your IT team and not the business people looking for a change. Luckily, in Heinen's case, everyone wanted more data or information. With the overall idea of easier data access, it told me that associates wanted change. This is not usually something that happens. People by nature are very resistant to change. A data strategy to encompass both the ability to make changes, but also consider the culture of the company and if that change will be accepted or not. Change management is a very important piece in the journey to becoming data informed. It's not something that happens overnight, and without carefully considering change management, your journey to becoming data informed will likely have hazardous roadblocks. How will we roll this change out? To whom will this be rolled out to first? How will training be delivered? You get the idea. There are a lot of topics that need to be addressed, and even some that build upon each other, especially training. Without the proper skills, associates wouldn't have a clear path forward to working with data. There would be confusion, not only in the ability to analyze data, but in communicating the results the data is showing. This is where data literacy fits into the picture. We have to plan on how we further advance the skills of the organization as a whole, mainly so the organization can effectively communicate with each other. This goes beyond just individual training that we've already planned for and strives to bring the entire company to its highest level of data literacy. It is an enormous task in itself to try and understand an organization's data literacy, let alone plan for how you're going to advance an individual or a team. This is another major component to consider for a data strategy when aiming to become more data informed. Okay, so now you're probably wondering, why would I waste all of this time talking to all of these different people when I really just needed to look at the data that they have? I had to address the people aspect first. The process and the technology will not make the decisions. The people will. Like I mentioned before, Heinen's top asset is their associates. Heinen's invests a lot of resources into their associates, and that was the first stop on that data-informed decision-making train. Not only do I want to put people first, but I also needed to have those associates tell me about their processes and how they're currently operating. This will help me understand where we need to go to get them to become more data informed. Becoming more data informed also needs to consider the processes themselves that are in place to turn data into information. If the necessary processes are manual or just simply inefficient, data informed decision making will be much harder to tackle than you may have anticipated. We need to build repeatable and automated processes in order to really start bringing information together as efficiently as possible. These processes don't necessarily just dictate what data moves through the pipeline, but also how. Now we're back to what, why, and how of working with data again. It's a little bit of a vicious cycle when it comes to these three questions, but they really do address data in an excellent way. So let's focus on the how for a moment. When you think of processes that control how data is moving, you're probably focusing on tools, rightfully so. But I'd like to turn your attention to the processes that govern that data. How are we transforming our data and putting it into a format that makes more sense for everyone? How are our processes working to make sure that we have good data to make the best decisions from? This is an area that unfortunately many, including Heinen, struggle with. Data governance is another key component in any company's data strategy. It's a cornerstone for making better and more data-informed decisions. If the data we're working with hasn't gone through the proper processes to cleanse and control it, we may as well go back to relying on our gut-based decision-making. Bad processes will surely lead to bad decisions, and this is undeniably an area that we cannot overlook when trying to become more data-informed decision makers. Once you have a better handle on your data governance, your processes will basically run themselves. Data governance is really taking all of your processes and ensuring they work together to produce the result you're looking for. If you're not focusing on data governance, this will become a huge gap to becoming more data informed. Now, Being a local grocery store, Heinen's doesn't have a very large IT team, nor are they very technology driven. They were continuing to do things the way that they always have. This is something I hear often. If it works, don't change it. Well, it may seem to work if you're not looking at the data. The data was telling a little bit of a different story about what was working. If the data is telling a different story than the decisions being made, you're not practicing data-informed decision-making. This is a surefire way to see just how many decisions are made based off of gut feel. Heinen's has the drive to make the change to become data-informed, which is the biggest step that you can take. Change is never easy, but this is where we get into the fun part. The part that everyone always focuses on when they think of change, technology. Technology is what was missing to help associates look at the data closer. Technology is the key to a quicker understanding of the story behind what the data is telling you. Assessing whether your company has the right technology in place is not the first step in my process, though. Actually, I'm not sure if you noticed, but it's the last. The common theme amongst Heinen's associates was tools. Almost everyone wanted to know what tools we were going to recommend to deliver information. This is where we again took a step back to educate on how tools don't fix broken or non-existent processes, but people with an understanding of where processes are breaking down do. Again, people and process come first. Technology is extremely important, but it is not the ultimate problem solver. We have many other steps to take to get to our goal of becoming data-informed decision makers. Technology should be the medium for two things. One, processing the data so it's clean and formatted, and two, how we deliver the data or information to our consumers. We have to view our technology as the way that helps make better decisions. Selecting the right technology is undeniably the part where you can have the most impact, but it's also important to have a checklist of needs after you figure out what you are trying to do. Letting technology drive your decision-making process is backwards in a sense. If you go after the next shiny tool that pops up, you'll be continuously wasting your time if you have no reason to own that tool. Your decision-making process should really be driving your technology needs. Innovation comes from solving real-world problems and not from implementing new tools. All right, we've touched on many points in a very short period of time. Let's take a recap of what we've actually looked at here. Data-informed decision-making. What is it? It's the process of letting the data tell a story, but bringing your own real-world experiences into the decision-making process. Why is data-informed decision-making important? It's your stepping stone from making decisions based off your experience to doing a little bit of a gut check on what you think you know versus what the data is telling you. How do we become data-informed? We need to create a plan. Some call it a data strategy, like myself. Some call it something else, but it really adds up to making sure that you know your journey. We could continue to drive west to get to California from where we're at in Ohio, but if we have a map that shows us where we're going, that will lead to a road well-traveled with everything that we actually need along the way. This again is where the three key critical factors come in again, the what, why, and how of working with data. What do these factors do? They help solve for what your plan represents and what you're going to achieve on the way to your goal. Many aspects go into making up your plan, but only your organization can determine what those are, as culture will dictate how a plan can be executed. Now, we've brought everything together for a full circle. Let's use our three key critical factors in a little different way. Let's use them to help describe what you're after overall. Again, these quick questions really do help evaluate data pretty well. So what were we doing with Heinen's? Heinen's wanted easier access to data. Why are we doing it? We're driving the organization to become more data-informed decision makers. How are we doing it? We're focusing on people, process, and technology. If you're ever at a point where you think to yourself, how could I use data to make a decision? Don't hesitate to take a step back and understand where you're actually at. Don't forget to ask yourself the three critical questions of what, why, and how. Always keep people, process, and technology at the forefront. And certainly don't forget to put a plan together before you take that first step forward. Following the framework I've outlined will help you go from this is what I think we should do to this is what I know we should do because the data says so. I'd like to thank everyone for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed my story about why it's important to take a step back before making a bigger step forward in your data and analytics journey.